This is game 10 from the 2023 World Chess Championship match. Ding Liren has the white pieces in this one and trails 4 points to 5 in this race to 7.5. Let's have a look. Another c4 game. We saw this in game 4. Ding Liren had the white pieces in that one. English opening. We deviate from game 4 on move 4. In game 4 it was e3. This game it's e4. That makes d4 a whole. Black points a piece there straight away. And this allows white to follow up with a center fork trick. Kicking off after knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and d4. White will soon win the piece back. Now I'd like to point out an attempt by black on this move 5 to first take on f2 and say, you're now uncastled. This would not be a good choice for black. White is considered to be winning in this position, largely based on the big center and the bishop pair. King safety is not an issue for white. On a check, you go to g1, no problems. So, it's simply knight takes e5 on this move 5. Allowing the center fork trick, black maintains the more important minor piece, pinning the knight, which makes this guy unprotected. So white gets the piece back. Black takes on e4. As Nepomniachtchi pointed out in the press conference, this line ended up being quite forced. This early stage, in fact, after these first 9 moves, we say goodbye to all knights. Unlike game 9, the knights were still around deep into that game. Right at the very end, move 82, they were still around. They're gone in this one, and the bishop has a choice. He could go to a5, or the move played in the game, bishop c5. From a5, it places a restriction on the queen. She can't go wherever she wants. She has a responsibility. But it sticks around on c5. It has more of an influence on the kingside squares. There are some lines where maybe it arrives on d6 after this guy's challenged. e7, possibly? Who knows, maybe even f8. There are some cases where this pawn moves and the bishop may look to challenge a piece, let's say on the h6 square. So, in short, has more of a kingside influence from c5 rather than a5. Okay, from here, queen g3, immediately putting pressure on g7, and king to f8. Not a mouse slip. Protecting this pawn uncastled. And if you castle, right now you're in this pin, and you have to deal with bishop to h6. It says white would have even better with first bishop to g5, but the main point here, there are ways white can take advantage of this pawn. Black would be losing the exchange if you castle, is what it's coming down to. So no castles. King f8. And from here, bishop to e2. So you have 2 options for the bishop. Why maybe not to d3? One reason, after the d file opens up, the queen will have pressure on it. And another, there are lines where maybe queen e7 can be hitting with check if the bishop is on d3 rather than e2. So it seems like a bit more passive post, but it takes into account these dynamic ideas that black may have. From here, d6, got to get the queenside pieces out. Challenging e5. White would prefer to recapture on e5 with a bishop rather than a queen. She'd be accessible to an attack one way or the other from e5. So bishop f4, more development. Queen e7, and now rook to d1, increasing the pressure on d6. So if in this position white castles, that leaves this bishop unprotected. And there's an interesting line here where white could end up losing this bishop, but still it would be considered a draw like to highlight this. So instead of the move played in the game rook d1, if white castles, we could have a line like this. It's kind of interesting. You could give up this bishop. Apparently it's still equal. If we get into a position like this, king gets to camp out on g6. Not sure exactly where we're supposed to go from here, but it's considered an equal position, even though we're down a bishop. Okay. White doesn't allow any of that. No lines where the queen is taking the bishop. It's still defended here, and we have this increased pressure on d6. It is now hit how many times? 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and only defended 3. So it's close to falling. h5 on board. White does not take on d6 just yet. So, first of all, with h5, black needs to find a way to get this rook activated. So, trying to activate the king with, let's say, g6, king g7, that's probably going to fail. As soon as g6 is in there, that would weaken h6. And this guy would probably hop there straight away. So, not really making progress like that. h5 is a step in the direction of maybe one day activating the rook along the h-file, although right now doesn't seem so likely with the bishops pointing there, but it's a possibility in some cases. Additionally, this pawn looks to go one step further with tempo, and even another, so possible space grab nearby with h4. What black really isn't too concerned about is an ending. So even if white in this position starts to chop away at d6, in this position he castles. If white takes on d6, black would have to recapture with the pawn, I should note. Recapturing on d6 with the bishop would be losing because of rook takes bishop, and then bishop takes pawn, and there goes your queen. But black would recapture with the pawn, and if we get a position like this, there really isn't much of a worry for black, even though black would be down a pawn. These guys now start to show up as a liability. Once there isn't dynamic play left in the position, these static weaknesses on the queen side really show themselves to be a liability. So, in short, a queen exchange is welcome to black, even if it means losing a pawn. These two guys right here hold up white's 3 weakened queenside pawns. Okay, so no capture on d6 just yet. First castles, h4 hits, queen d3, still with an eye on d6. From here, g5. This really forces the situation. Don't really have much choice here. He ends up capturing away at d6, and he tries his hand in an ending. No queens on board because he's looking forward to playing f4. This is still a try without the queens on board. We're going to see that white is able to exert pressure on this h-pawn. So we get these exchanges in on d6. The queens are off the board, and not so fast with king to e7. You could play that, but more precise, the move played in the game, bishop to e6. If you play king e7 straight away, white has available a counterattacking move. And you have to address the threat on g5. So, first it's bishop e6, cutting out any rook to d5, and next up it'll be king to e7. But in comes f4. This pawn has to be captured, not just yet. After king e7, rook d4, now it does have to be captured. There really isn't another option here for white, or excuse me, for black. Otherwise, white will be playing f5. kicking this bishop, the best piece, from a very good square. Well, that is why it is a best piece, because of its stability on this post. It shields the king, it observes two weak pawns, c4 directly, indirectly this guy. So this guy needs to go. It'd be far too disruptive to black if allowed to get to f5, and we could go one step further, maybe in some lines, and play f6. Planting a pawn on a dark square, bothering the king. This is really the best square for the king, so he's got to go. G takes f4. The other rook comes into the mix, and now how do you defend h4? You can't. So you have to move it. Don't allow this exchange. Instead, g4. White is up a pawn. It's not the healthiest pawn. These guys are all very weak, but nearby there can be the win of a second pawn. King f2, king g3, bishop f1, take on h3. What can black do in the meantime? Well, let's see. First, activating a rook, giving these guys some responsibility. There's plenty of defense for it right now, but this rook has in mind a weak link on a2. King f2, natural enough. Rook c5, a4. What's the idea? Well, instead of a4, if you play king g3, this rook plays here, and now your rook has to be a defender. So white's intention with a4 is to have the bishop be the defender of the a-pawn. From here, b6, very solid. No lines now where this bishop maybe wins a pawn. It's on a dark square, very healthy move. Favorite piece in the position, best piece, is probably this guy. Does an excellent job along the 5th rank. Nice lateral movement. Can't move the a-pawn. c-pawn's under observation. g-pawn, it's going nowhere because of this guy. So, with this in mind, white recognizes this is black's best piece. King g3, rook h6, rook e4, with an eye on what move exactly? Well, nearby, white has this. Rook to d5, challenging the rook. Okay, this last move is pinning the bishop, setting up rook to d5. Black has none of it. Immediately gets out of the pin. This rook lift, by the way, is looking at many 6th rank squares. There are some lines where it can pivot on g6, and, well, as we'll observe, there's another square it has in mind after some bishop move. But for starters, after this last one, we're getting out of the pin, not allowing white to challenge our best piece with rook to d5. King f8, rook d8 check, king g6. You could go to one of these two. It's best, the king is best placed on g7, or better placed on g7. In the event that this pawn falls, in some lines, it's not going to be hitting with check. So he does a good job of hiding. Right here on g7, the f-pawn is a good shield for the king. From here, rook a8. Rook c5. He's putting his attention now on these double isolated pawns. Rook takes a7. Bishop takes c4. That's the best way to take the pawn, because what black has in mind is the c3 pawn next. This guy still remains the best piece in the position. So bishop takes c4. This guy really isn't doing a whole lot. The rook is in the center. You would think it's a really great piece, but it really isn't doing so much. And soon, this is going to be hit. So how's white going to defend that? First it's rook e7, and now a very nice move. Rook on h to c6, as Vishy Anand ended up tweeting right around this point during the game. He said, after this last move, that about settles it. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically notes that c3 is now going to fall. There's no way to defend it. And sure enough, that's what we have in this one right here. There's no way to defend c3, and this one ends up, we end up having a mass exchange of pieces. Rook e5, one pair of rooks comes off, and then a flashy looking move, bishop b3. Bishop takes, rook takes pawn with the fork. We get straight to rook and pawn ending. Pawn's only on one side of the board. Simplifying further with f5. If g5, we play rook g4. We're soon going to win the pawn. What happens after pawn takes pawn? Let's see. This is the move played in the game. This guy simply gets one, and this one goes straight to, for the first time, straight to a king versus king position. After 45 moves, a draw on board, which takes us to 4.5, or I should say 5.5, 4.5 going into game 11. This was probably the least eventful game of the match so far. There wasn't really a great press by white in this game 10, but that's how it goes sometimes with these forcing lines right out of the opening, as Nepomniachtchi said. Let's have a look at the tail to tape on this one, and we can see that it was a super high quality game. 98% accuracy, identical with everything. Inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders, none to speak of. Average centi pawn loss, 5. Okay, very high quality game with this one. Ding Liren is running out of chances. He has 2 more white games. There are only 4 games remaining in the classical portion. We will see what happens soon enough. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.